Hello, everyone. Welcome to another edition of the Peaceful Solution Character Education Program Teacher Certification course. If you're joining us online, or if you're here at the Peaceful Solution headquarters, you can be seated. We thank you for coming on this cool summer day. Yes, we finally reached summer. And I had to bring my water so I don't get dehydrated up here. All right, so surprise. I know you were thinking Chris was going to be here. Chris couldn't be with us this evening, but he possibly will be back on the next class. David, if you're joining us online, David left off on the responsibility unit. That's what we're in, Unit 5 of the Peaceful Solution. If you are joining us on Facebook, you can hit the drop-down menu at the top of the page. And there's 5 manuals. We're in the responsibility unit. We're covering chapter 7, the final chapter of this unit. And we're going to be picking up where David left off in the last class. He was talking about terrorism, and he was talking about earthquakes and terrorism. That was on page 141 and 142, or through 143, I believe. We're gonna go back and we're gonna do a little review tonight because earthquakes, like David was saying, it's a very serious subject, and it's something we've seen a big increase in, in this time period that we're in right now. In the last 50, 75, 80 years, we've seen a huge increase in earthquakes, and we need to kind of figure out what are earthquakes, because as we're going to learn tonight, earthquake science is really a theory. It's not really, they don't really know everything about the earth and how it operates. And that's in their own words. We'll see that as we go along tonight. If you can put up the first slide, we'll kind of get started here. Actually, before we look at that first slide, let's go ahead and go back to lesson plan. Let's go to lesson plan 7, page D, in step number 6. Step number 6, lesson plan 7, page D, step number 6. It says, inform students that earthquakes are another dangerous and often unpredictable disaster that can cause deaths of thousands of people each year worldwide. And it says, ask students to name the 3 main types of earthquakes. And if you were listening to David last time, you probably learned the names of these 3 types of earthquakes, which are tectonic, talking about, and we'll see what that means here in a minute, volcanic, and artificial. And that's what we're really going to be studying tonight, is about these artificial, or what they call induced seismological events. Okay, we'll learn about that, and tell students that of the 3, tectonic is far the most destructive and deadly by far. Have students read the section earthquakes on page 141 to 43 and emphasize that although earthquakes can be unpredictable, finding out if you live in an earthquake-prone area and then taking precautions are just some of the ways you can take responsibility for your safety. So I'm going to show you an area of the world this evening where if you live in that area of the world, you need to be taking, you better be preparing, and I think a lot of them already are, that live in this, what we're going to talk about tonight, this ring of fire that I talked about, I think in the last class, when I covered a little bit about earthquakes. But let's go ahead and hop on over to page 142. Sorry, 141. And if you can put up the first slide now, it says on page 141 of the responsibility unit, earthquakes can also cause great loss, where am I? That's page 141. Okay, sorry. I'm jumping ahead. I don't have the first paragraph in that. Okay, so let's go ahead and back out of that slide. Earthquakes can also cause great loss of life and property by destroying buildings, bridges, and dams. And the power of an earthquake can cause telephone and power lines to fall, fires, explosions, and landslides. And now you can put up that slide. And it says generally there's three classes of earthquakes. There's tectonic, volcanic, and artificial. It says tectonic is by far the most damaging and devastating of the three. Let's look at the word, let's jump to the next slide real quick and we'll come back. I want you to look at this map here. This is Encyclopedia Britannica talking about plate tectonics, okay? And basically there's 16 plates, as you can see there, this is a theory. And if you notice, plate tectonics says is theory dealing with dynamics of the Earth's outer shell. Now, whenever you see the word theory, the first thing you need to remember is it's not true. It's not necessarily true. Okay? In other words, they don't really know. It's guesswork. Now, they might know certain things about geology and things like that, but there's a lot of it's mysterious to them. They really don't understand how this operates. So I want you to understand that it's not perfect information. It's not necessarily true facts. And remember what we learned in the Peaceful Solution about gathering all the facts, making sure they're correct, and gathering all the facts, making sure those are true facts before you decide on something, right? What's that called? Yeah, it's called educated. That's one of the character traits that we teach in this program. So remember, when you're dealing with information about earthquakes, it's not always true, okay? But I will give you some true facts tonight that you can chew on, so you can learn more about earthquakes. Let's back up real quick and read the rest of that. It says, tectonic quakes are caused when the plates that make up the Earth's surface slide and bump against each other. Where these plates meet are called fault lines. When these plates slide against each other, they cause the Earth to vibrate. And many of these vibrations are barely noticeable. You know, in other words, there's always earthquake activity taking place all the time under the Earth. And a lot of times it's not, you know, the U.S. Geological Service won't even measure it unless it's over a certain caliber or seismic, oh boy, what do they call it? It's a certain point on the Richter scale, as we're going to see here in a minute. Many of these vibrations are barely noticeable, but others are so strong they cause the Earth to split and buildings to collapse, resulting in thousands of people dying. And there are many countries that are located over the Earth's fault lines. For example, there's Portugal, Morocco, Italy, Greece, Turkey, Iran, and India. I think out of all those, I hear a lot of earthquakes in Iran, and, you know, like tens of thousands of people die in these earthquakes over there, you know. But it's only a little article in the, you know, page 3 of the newspaper, you know, 100,000 perish in Iran quake. You know, if it was America or some special country, you know, like the UK or something, or Canada, we'd probably hear about it for days. But for some reason, Iran don't make the news. Okay, so let's go ahead and go to the next visual here. Now I want to gear us up a little bit. I got a lot of slides tonight. We got a lot to go through, so I want to prepare you to know we're going to be moving pretty rapidly through the pictures, okay? There's no video, but there will be pictures. And I want to explain here about Earth magnitude scale. That's what the word I was looking for a minute ago, about the Richter scale, or the magnitude scale that the seismologists measure these quakes. Now, 2.5 or less, usually you don't even feel it, okay? You know, and it's that magnitude scale goes all the way to 10, by the way. That 8's like considered like the greatest. An 8.0 earthquake, it's great, and it's going to cause great destruction in any community that you have an 8.0 earthquake. But they don't show anything past 8 on there. And because when you get into 9, we're going to see here in a minute, the largest earthquake ever recorded in history, at least recorded history, as we'll see in the next slide. Let's go to the next slide so you can see it. It was called the 1960 Valdivia earthquake in Chile. Okay, in Chile. And that quake was 9.6. 9.6 on the scale, and lasted for 10 minutes. Understand that, 10 minutes. I want you to think for a minute, just sitting in this class for 10 minutes. Okay, now imagine the earth shaking violently for 10 minutes and it don't stop. And that's what makes it so devastating and damaging, is and that's what makes it so high on the Richter scale, is it shakes and shakes and it doesn't stop for a long, long time. Remember the Alaska earthquake? It said it was 4.5 minutes. This one was 10 minutes. 10 minutes. Okay. I can't even imagine going through something like that. That's got to be very, very, very horrifying, to say the least. Not only did this earthquake take place, but just hours later, the volcano that you see down there erupted there. That earthquake caused that volcano to also erupt at the same time, in the same place, the same country. Okay? So you can see how the earthquake activity and volcanic activity go hand in hand. And that was a pretty devastating volcano right there. The tidal wave, I want you to understand, the tidal wave from this earthquake went to Hawaii. It killed something like 80-something people in Hilo, Hawaii. The tidal wave went, I can't remember all the different countries it went to, but I think I might have it on the next slide. Let's see if I have. No? Go back to the last slide. Yeah, it says, well, there's a bunch of countries listed, but I can't really see too well with this screen for some reason. I don't know. It's kind of, let me move it closer to me. Okay. Now this location here, Valdivia, Chile, is located in the Ring of Fire, it says. It's in that Ring of Fire I was talking to you about last time. Let's go to the next slide. But what we're going to be talking about tonight, remember there's tectonic activity, which is the plates that move underneath the ground. But there's another, it's called artificial. And in that next slide, it kind of gives you the definition of artificial earthquakes or induced seismicity. It's typically earthquakes and tremors that are caused by human activity that alters the stresses and strains on the Earth's crust. So the Earth is already going through certain stresses and strains underneath. The plates are doing their thing. These faults are being made. And then along comes mankind doing certain things to cause even more stress. Probably it's kind of like the Peaceful Solution teaches, stress is okay. You know, like stress, a certain amount of stress is necessary so we can get the job done. You know, deadlines and things, you know, you got to have a certain amount of stress to get motivated to do something. But stress that's uncontrolled is a problem. You have to learn to control your stress if you have stress. Remember, it gives you all those different things you can do to help reduce stress in your life. Some of these things you see on here, some of the ways that the various applications you see, this oil and gas drilling. You have different, you got fracking. You have what they call, what's that, steam, I can't read this. Sorry, I just can't read it. I can't read what that says on this screen right here for some reason. Possibly, Michael, you could get me something I can read better with. I don't know. There's a lot of different things that's listed there. There's about 7 things listed there. It's just really hard to see. It's barely even readable. But there's oil and gas exploration. There's nuclear activity. There's also wastewater activity. There's when they inject water into the ground, injecting water into the ground, causing stress on the plates, also taking water up from the ground, okay, when they build some of these hydro plants, okay, does certain things to the earth, okay, underneath. So there's a lot of different things that they can do to cause what's called induced seismicity. Now, if you know about babies or inducing birth, right, you can actually cause the birth of a baby, you know, like they have certain ways that they can induce the woman to go into labor and have that child. Well, the same thing with the earth. You can induce the earth to do certain things. That's what's called consequences. Remember the word consequences? Consequences come when we do things that we probably shouldn't be doing, or we do too much of a certain thing, because certain things might be okay, but when you go overboard because of greed, y'all remember what you learned about the Dust Bowl, right? When they over-farmed the land, remember they were plowing up the land, millions of acres, and they got greedier and greedier, and pretty soon, you know, next thing you know, here comes these huge dust storms, you know, across the plain. It wasn't because of the plowing. Plowing itself isn't a problem. It was the greed. It was the amount that was being done, okay? So same thing goes with the earth. You know, there's certain things they're doing to really plunder this earth that's causing stress upon the earth. Let's go ahead and go to the next visual. And when I was growing up in Alaska, I think when I was I graduated in 81, so it was a year before, so I must have been in 11th grade, is when this one took place. You remember Mount St. Helens in Washington State. Mount St. Helens is a volcano in the Cascade Mountains of Washington. And it says, earthquake activity around Mount St. Helens spiked to nearly 350 quakes. This is this year, by the way. This erupted before, back in 1980. But now listen to what's going on right now on Mount St. Helens. Remember that 1980, how many years ago was that? 44? My word, man, 44 years ago. So now, just this week, this comes out, earthquake activity around Mount St. Helens spiked to nearly 350 quakes between February 1st, 2024 to June 18th, 2024. In a Twitter post from the U.S. Geological Service, volcanoes, the seismic activity seen recently could mean the arrival of additional magma known as a process called recharge. So, in other words, the magma, you know, that hot stuff, that hot molten stuff inside that volcano, is starting to recharge, starting to build up again. Okay, so there's usually the scientists know, just like they did back in 1980, you know, all the in fact, they named one of the areas around the mountain after one of the U.S. Geological Service guys that died, that set up his camera there to watch the explosion. They didn't realize what they were about to see. What they were about to see was the largest volcanic explosion in U.S. history, where the entire north side of a mountain just blew, okay? And so it says, small magnitude earthquakes located beneath Mount St. Helens at depths well below sea level are generally thought to be associated with pressurization of the magma transport system. Okay, so you see there's activity going on Mount St. Helens. Well, where's Mount St. Helens located? It's located on the west coast. The west coast. And it's located in what's called the Ring of Fire. Okay, that's what we're focusing on tonight, is that area. So if you live in Washington State, or you live in Oregon, or even in California, or even Vancouver, I got news for you. You better be preparing, because I'm telling you, you're getting ready to see the biggest earthquake you've ever seen. And they won't be able to measure this one. Okay? You're about to see the largest earthquake ever on Earth. Okay? And I'm going to show you, I'm going to link it all together and show you how I know how. Okay, so let's go to the next slide. Here's a picture 40 years ago of Mount St. Helens when it erupted. Okay? And remember, this was very quick. If you were to watch the video, which I don't have tonight, you can go and watch it yourself. This whole side of this mountain disappeared. In fact, it went from 9,770 feet to 8,000 something feet. That's how much they lost on the top of the mountain. That blew, okay? And no one was expecting it to be anything like that, okay? So it says, on the morning of May 18th, 1980, an earthquake started the eruption, which lasted several days, and then an enormous plume of smoke, ash, and rock came up, and the rest is history. Let's go to the next slide. And so, like I told you, before the eruption, this volcano, Mount St. Helens, was 9,677 feet high, and more than 1,300 feet was taken off that mountain instantly, okay, in that explosion. The plume of smoke, the ash, went up 80,000 feet into the air, okay? And once it goes into that, you know, the atmosphere way up there like that, it's going to travel around and it's going to have an effect on different areas of the world, not just that area, okay? In fact, they showed before, I don't remember the name of the volcano, but it was a volcano that blew, I think in the 1700s, 16 or 1700s, they say, that actually caused the Earth's temperature to go down 2 or 3 degrees average. Just one volcano. Okay, so these are very powerful forces of nature. Okay, they're not anything to play with. In fact, when I lived in Alaska, we had a lot of volcanic activity, even around Anchorage, across the inlet where I lived, in the can't remember that range of mountains, where it's where Mount McKinley's at. Across the ocean there's a big range of mountains, and there's a whole bunch of volcanoes there. And once in a while, a volcano would erupt, and ash would go everywhere, and Anchorage, the city I lived in, would be blanketed with ash. And in the wintertime, all the snow turned black, and, you know, we'd go out and play in it, and it's actually kind of dangerous. It would ground airplanes. You couldn't fly or anything in the ash because it ruins airplane engines. But so I have a little bit of experience in the past with volcanoes, but not up close. Okay, so let's go to the next slide. It says, Mount St. Helens continues to be one of the most active and monitored volcanoes in the United States. And as you can see now, it's located in that Pacific Ring of Fire. And it's getting active again right now. They're telling you, warning you this week, there's activity there again. It's waking up, okay? And they take that very seriously when they start to feel these rumblings going on. Let's go to the next slide. So here's a picture of the Ring of Fire I was telling you about, okay? And you can see it goes all the way over to the left. You see the country of Australia. Down below that, Australia is a continent, right? Is it one of the continents? Okay. And then off to the right down there, you got, let's see, that's New Zealand. You see along the coast there on the left, you see Japan, where they had the tsunami and the earthquake in 2004, 2011. These are a very active area right here. It goes up to the top where you see the Aleutian chain there in Alaska, which is heavily loaded with volcanoes and activity there. Stretches all the way around the Alaska, Gulf of Alaska there, down through Juneau, down through Canada, British Columbia, into Washington State, Oregon, down into California, into Mexico, and down into South Middle America there, the Middle American Trench they call it, and then down into South America, all the way around. That's what they call the Ring of Fire. And it's not just called the Ring of Fire. I think they call it the Ring of Fire, but there's another reason why you're going to start to understand it's called the Ring of Fire, because it ain't just volcanoes and earthquakes. There's some other activity going on, been going on there for years, that's inducing volcanic activity or volcanic and earthquake activity. Remember, it's induced, it's artificial. Mankind is creating this problem, okay, by their own behavior, okay? So, believe it or not, yes, we're responsible for earthquakes. I remember years ago, I think it was 2004, it was kind of an interesting article. I wanted to study it some more, but it was the president of Iran. The president or one of the ayatollahs of Iran said earthquakes were being caused by adultery and STDs. I thought that was pretty interesting because I saw somebody that realized that earthquakes are actually, many of them, most of them, are created by mankind's activities. Now, I didn't really study too much into what he said, but I thought it was interesting that somebody said that man's activities were actually causing things in the earth. Okay? So let's go to the next slide. All right, so here's this ring of fire again. It says this area of the ring of fire is home to the most active volcanoes and earthquake locations in the world, with over 90% of all earthquakes occurring here. Get that. Over 90% of all earthquakes on Earth are taking place in this ring of fire right here that you see. And it's a huge swath of land, okay? And most of it's all taking place there. It says, if you're looking at a map or a globe, the ring of fire traces the edges of the Pacific Ocean. And how ironic is that? How ironic is it that the ocean that it surrounds is called Pacific, which means peace, right? La Solution Pacifica, right? It means peace, but yet it's where 90% of this activity is taking place, okay? And let's go ahead and go into the next slide. I told you I got a lot of slides. So here's a picture of Washington State. You see the Pacific Ocean right there on the coast. And you see down where it says figure 3, you see Mount St. Helens, which kind of straddles the border of Oregon and Washington there, and southwest Washington. Okay, so just so you can get an idea of where it's located. And remember, there's activity taking place there right now, okay, that they're concerned about. It's been 44 years since that mountain blew, okay? Let's go to the next visual. Now, it says, did you know that the state of this is back on page 141 of the Peaceful Solution Responsibility. It says, did you know the state of California is located over a fault line? It's called the San Andreas Fault. Although earthquakes have been very difficult to predict, in recent years, seismologists, that's scientists who study earthquakes, have had some success in predicting when and where an earthquake will strike. In 1975, the Chinese predicted an earthquake would hit the city of Haicheng. They evacuated 90,000 residents, and I know David talked about this last time, and 2 days before the quake, destroyed 90% of the city's buildings. So you see, they knew an earthquake was coming, they took action, they prepared, they were responsible, and they saved lives, okay? And that's what we need to do ourselves. Most earthquakes, however, are not predicted in time, and many people die. And it talks about in September of '85, a major quake shook Morocco City, leaving 30,000 people homeless and 7,000 dead. And on Friday, January 6, 2001, a major earthquake killed 100,000 people at Gujarat, India. Gujarat, India. Okay? And you probably didn't even hear about that. Again, it was probably page 3 of some newspaper, right? Because it was in India, you know. I mean, you know, they got 1 billion people over there, so what's 100,000? That's how, I guess, how they look at it. I don't know, because I never heard about it. You know, that's a lot of people. That's a lot of lives. That's a lot of human beings that had families and lived their lives just like we do, right? Just amazing how, you know, you'll hear about an earthquake in California that kills, you know, 3 or 4 people, and you'll hear about it for days afterwards, but you don't hear about these huge earthquakes they're having, swallowing up whole villages and stuff. So you see that fault line right there. It's visible. It's visible. A fault is a divide. It's a split. Okay, it's a split. It looks like a big crack or crevice going up the whole area there, that whole piece of land, and that's what it is. Okay, so let's go ahead and go to the next visual. Now, this is a news source here, and it says earthquakes. The big one is coming. Now, they know that there's fixing to be a big earthquake. They've been waiting for a big earthquake for a long time. And I remember growing up, in the 70s, I think it was 1977, and a movie called Earthquake came out, Charlton Heston or somebody, I don't remember. But, there was a big fascination with the big one that they knew was coming, and so they made movies about it and, showed, like the whole state of California basically going into the water, and whole towns being swallowed up and things. Well, they might not be too far from the truth there, but they're expecting a big earthquake. And why are they expecting it? Because it's way overdue. That baby is way overdue. I'm going to show you. It's not just the San Andreas fault, okay? That's only the one you hear about. That's the one that that's the most famous one that I know of. There's another one in the middle of the United States that most people have never even heard of, called the New Madrid Fault, which also is very dangerous. And they're waiting for another huge earthquake to take place there one day. But let's go ahead and go to the next visual. This beautiful city right here is in British Columbia. This is Vancouver, British Columbia. Now, I'm from Alaska, and you'd probably think, well, if you've been to Alaska, you've seen beautiful land, the beautiful country. You ain't seen beauty till you go to British Columbia. British Columbia is the most beautiful place I've ever seen on this earth. Okay, when you're going through the roads, traveling over the roads there, through the mountains, it's the most beautiful place you've ever seen. I've never seen anything like it. If I could have stayed there all day and just took pictures and admired the beauty, it was a very beautiful place. And I was from Alaska, but I was impressed. That should tell you something. But it was extremely beautiful. And but it's on an extremely dangerous. There's faults, and there's something else we're going to talk about that it's sitting on that you need to know about. That whole area goes. Okay, so it's called a subduction zone. And if you could be writing these things down, just a simple definition of it. It just means, it's a big crash scene, where plates collide and one dives or goes underneath another plate. That's the theory. Okay, that's what they're saying takes place, which creates the Earth's movement, the tsunamis, etc. The earthquakes, the tsunamis, etc. So let's go to the next slide. Now, this particular subduction zone is called the Cascadia subduction zone. All through there, I'm going to read it to you. It says the Cascadia subduction zone, it says, is off the Pacific coast. It stretches from northern Vancouver Island in Canada to northern California in the United States, or right there in San Francisco, where the San Andreas Fault begins. It is capable of producing a 9.0 magnitude earthquake and tsunami that could reach 30 meters or 98 feet. Now imagine a 98-foot tsunami coming at Seattle, which is a port city, a very beautiful, they call it the Emerald City. It's an extremely beautiful city because it rains a lot in Seattle, so everything looks really clean, I used to live there for at least a year. I didn't like the smell of Tacoma, but I liked Seattle. It was a very pristine type place. It's capable, it says, of producing a 9.0 magnitude earthquake. Okay, the Oregon Department of Emergency Management estimates shaking would last 5 to 7 minutes along the coast, with strength and intensity decreasing further from the epicenter. It says, it is a very long sloping subduction zone where the explorer Juan de Fuca and Gorda plates move to the east and slide below the much larger, mostly continental Northern American plate. The zone veins in width and lies offshore beginning near Cape Mendocino, Northern California, passing through Oregon and Washington and terminating at about Vancouver Island in British Columbia, that beautiful city I showed you. So, look here. That entire west coast, from British Columbia all the way down the San Andreas Fault to Los Angeles, okay, is on that subduction zone. That's all on, they're getting ready for something big. And once one of them goes, I guarantee you the whole thing's going. I'm gonna show you how I know how. Let's go to the next slide. Now, so here's kind of an imagery of Vancouver, and there's Seattle there, a little to the south, and there's Portland down there. So there's three major cities, three major American cities right there, port cities, basically by the ocean, that if a 9.0 earthquake takes place, okay, and a 90-foot tidal wave comes in as a result of that, they're done, okay? And they know it. And they know it. And they know they're way overdue. They think they're about 500 years. The last one was about 500 years ago. And they know they're on borrowed time right now. They all know it. They're just hoping it doesn't occur in their lifetime, okay? And I hope it didn't. I hope it wouldn't either, but I have a feeling, I think I have more than a feeling, that it's going to take place very soon, okay? And I'm going to show you how. So let's go to the next visual. This is called, now this here, this is another fault that's running east to west, right in the same area there in Seattle. It's called the Seattle Fault. You see that? That's called the Seattle Fault. So there's faults running through, you know, Puget Sound, which is, my mom and dad used to live in Bremerton, which is right across Puget Sound from Seattle, about 60 miles. You take ferry boats across this water right here. It's a very beautiful place. But Puget Sound is like, it's the body of water, the Pacific Ocean is over to the west. Okay, so all of this, if a tidal wave comes in, of course, it's going to come through that sound, and it's going to wipe out that entire area right there. As you see, Seattle sits between two bodies of water right there. But it's called the Seattle Fault. You know, an interesting thing about Seattle, too, is, you know, they had a fire back in the 1800s. I remember it was a big myth when I was growing up, when I was living in Seattle, but it's called Underground Seattle. They had a fire that wiped out the whole business district of the city in the 1800s. Started in a candle factory or something, I don't remember, but after that, they made the standard. Once they had that fire, you had to build everything with brick. If you wanted your business in that district, you had to build it with brick or mortar or whatever. So, which makes it even worse when it comes to earthquakes, right? But this was a fire that caused them to go into the brick thing. Let's go to the next slide. It says, one of the worst nightmares for many Pacific Northwest residents is a huge earthquake along the offshore Cascadia subduction zone, which would unleash damaging and likely deadly shaking in coastal Washington, Oregon, British Columbia, and Northern California. Okay? So you see it affects a huge area and a huge population of people. Just that particular zone right there, that particular subduction zone, the Cascadia subduction zone. And remember, Mount St. Helens is in the Cascadian mountain range right there too, and it's shaking right now. There's activity taking place there right now, okay? And remember, everything's linked. Everything's linked, okay? There's linkage that goes on here, as you're going to see, that this is all a linkage that's leading to something really, really big, okay? So let's go to the next slide. Now, this is from CNN.com. It says, simulation shows tsunami waves as high as 42 feet could hit Seattle in minutes should a major earthquake occur on the Seattle fault. And that's just the Seattle fault. Not even talking about the Cascadia zone there. This is what they're worried about. They don't just put these articles out because they need something to write in the newspaper or on the news website. They're concerned that this is going to take place because they know it's way overdue, okay? So what ought you to be doing right now if you live in this zone, if you live in these areas? What ought you be doing? If I was you, I'd be doing more than preparing. I'd probably move farther inland, like toward Texas, right? Probably, in fact, we live here, I heard, here in Abilene is the safest place from earthquakes, right? So I think I like it right here, you know, right here in Abilene, right? It's a great place to move if you all want to get here now, because I'm telling you, in fact, a lot of people are already moving out of California for other reasons. It ain't because of the earthquakes. I think it's because of the high taxes and some of the crazy, what do they call them? Not laws, but I don't want to down anybody, but some of the crazy rules that their leaders come up with there, you know, people are just like, I can't take it anymore. You know, like, where are they coming up with these ideas? And they're moving over to Texas. You know, I think Elon Musk was one of them that moved out of there and came here and started his company here. But anyway, let's go to the next slide. Okay, so here's like, you know, just a kind of a graphic of what you might expect, right? You know, huge crevices, buildings falling in, chunks of land going off into the sea, into the ocean. You know, that's what they imagine taking place with these huge earthquakes. Let's go to the next slide. Now, let's talk about the secret world of nukes in Washington State. All right. Most of you didn't know. If you studied the Manhattan Project and you studied nuclear activity and nuclear bombs, Washington has played one of the biggest parts in nuclear activity since they've been doing it. In fact, the first plutonium plant, remember, it was in Hanford, Washington on the Columbia River, okay, where they made the plutonium for the Fat Man bomb that they dropped on Nagasaki on August 9th, 1945. They built a huge plant in Hanford in Washington. They had 50,000 people that didn't know what they were even doing, didn't even know what they were making. Until after that bomb dropped, they figured it out. They knew what they were making. They were making plutonium for an atom bomb on the Columbia River right there in Washington. It says, beneath the still waters of Puget Sound, submarines loaded with nukes patrol the Kitsap Peninsula and beyond. Farther east at Joint Base Lewis McChord on Interstate 5 near Tacoma is the only U.S. military unit to call for transportation of nuclear weapons by air. Even further east in Richland is the Hanford site, historically the nation's biggest producer of plutonium for nuclear weapons. Washington State has been home to nuclear weapons-related projects for decades, some well-known, others shrouded in secrecy. These projects have contributed to a robust nuclear presence in the military, a booming nukes industry, and death and injury to hundreds of thousands of people in Washington State and across the Pacific. Yes, because the nuclear bombs they've been exploding have contaminated people, destroyed their lands, their islands they lived on, and they've paid out nearly $1 billion $1 billion just to the people that lived in the Marshall Islands in the Pacific there, where they blew up their islands with nukes and contaminated the islanders. Okay? We'll get to that. Washington has been at all levels a cornerstone of the U.S. nuclear enterprise. So let's go ahead and go to the next slide. From the same article, the United States attacked Hiroshima, Japan in 1945 with the first nuke ever used in war, killing more than 100,000 people. About 2 years before that, the Manhattan Project arrived at Hanford in eastern Washington. General Leslie Groves, head of the secret project, and a Seattle Queen Anne High School alumnus, This guy went to high school and college in Washington, Leslie Groves. I don't know if you know who he is, but he's Oppenheimer's pal that created the Los Alamos lab, built the Pentagon. Leslie Groves was a busy man back in the late 30s and early 40s. He built the Pentagon. He was in charge of the Manhattan Project, and he got it all done. He built the plutonium place in Washington, and then the one, I think it was in Tennessee, Oak Ridge, Tennessee, where they had the, what's the other, plutonium and uranium factory. And they got all of this done in just a space of 3 or 4 years to build these bombs. And Leslie Groves was the main man. He was the general that put all this together, along with Oppenheimer and these other scientists that got together to build this bomb. But he was from Seattle. In fact, he went to college there for a while and high school. It says, to nearly everyone, the news, no, it says around 50,000 people worked there, but most didn't know what they were working on until hours after the Hiroshima attack. To nearly everyone, the news of what Richland was helping to make came as a complete surprise. Jubilation and satisfaction follows revelation of product manufactured here. In other words, when the people found out that they're the ones that made the plutonium to destroy hundreds of thousands of people in Japan, they were so excited and they were celebrating. The product, plutonium, is what that product was that they were making. 3 days later, it fueled the U.S.'s second and last attack on Japan in Nagasaki, where they dropped the plutonium Fat Man bomb. Let's go to the next slide. Now, a little further down the coast. Bohemian Grove, it's about 70 miles north of San Francisco, right off the San Andreas Fault right there, is where they had the first planning for the Manhattan Project, the first meeting. Oppenheimer and all of his friends got together in September of 42 at the Bohemian Grove in California there to plot and plan the creation of the atomic weapon. Okay, that's where they had their first meeting, and that's one of their biggest brags, you know, that Oppenheimer and all of his friends hosted this meeting there for the Manhattan Project for the first time. Let's go to the next slide. That's where the San Andreas Fault lies, Northern California. As you can see the map here, you see San Francisco there. Goes all the way down the coast there. Okay, the San Andreas Fault that David was talking about in the last class. Okay, so you see this whole thing stretches down that whole west coast, right? You got the Cascadia subduction zone, you've got the Seattle faults, you've got the San Andreas Fault, and that whole entire west coast. And they've all been involved in nukes for a long, long time. And if you live by the sword, they say, if you live by war, you often die by it. You know, that's a saying I've heard somewhere. Let's go to the next slide. Now, Parkfield, California, I don't know if you know where that is. There's a map right there. The Parkfield experiment, that's where the U.S. Geological Survey started doing experiments because they figured out that earthquakes along that place occur every 20, 22, or 23 years. So they call it the earthquake capital of the world. It's in California. Moderate earthquakes, about magnitude 6, have occurred on the Parkfield section of the San Andreas Fault at fairly regular intervals. 1857, 1881, 1901, 1922, 1934, and 1966. All these Parkfield earthquakes have struck in the same area. Historical seismographs show that at least the 1934 and 1966 shocks initiated at the same point on the fault. So this is where they do most of their earthquake study in Parkfield, California, because that particular spot has regularly scheduled seismic activity at 20 some odd year intervals. But they haven't had one for a while. They're way overdue again. 1934 and 1966 were the last ones. Let's go to the next slide. Again, here's the San Andreas Fault. Here's California. Right next door you have Nevada. Nevada. Anybody know anything about Nevada? Las Vegas. Okay. Well, if you see that nuke test there, the what they call that, the nuclear cannon, that was there in Nevada. Let's go to the next slide. Let's learn what's been going on in Nevada. It's called the Nevada Test Site. The Nevada Test Site. Nuclear testing site operated by the U.S. Department of Energy in Nye County, Nevada, saw a total of 928 nuclear explosive tests between 1951 and September 1992. 928 nuclear detonations underground, above ground. You following me? Now, that didn't do any damage or cause any stress on what's going on in the earth, right? Because nothing occurred then, did it? Do you know something about consequences? Do they always come immediately? No, they don't. But you can see the craters they made there in the Yucatan Flats there. I think it's called the, let's see, what do they call those? Nuclear bomb craters at Yucca Flats, Nevada test site. Doesn't that look like the surface of the moon or something? No, those are underground nuclear explosive sites, where they blew up bombs. Okay, let's go to the next slide. So then, remember, now that's right there next to California, but here's the next thing they started doing after they dropped the Hiroshima bomb and the Nagasaki bomb. They started doing, in the Pacific, in the Ring of Fire, right there in the middle, they started doing what was called a nuke test, called Operation Crossroads was the first one, where, they took a bunch of Navy ships, old ships they wanted to just destroy and see what would occur if you blew them up in the ocean. One, they exploded underneath the water. The other one was, I think that was Able. And then Baker, I don't remember, one or Able or Baker, one was above ground, one was under the water. But that didn't hurt anything, did it? All it destroyed is those ships there, right? Didn't do any damage. Okay, let's go to the next slide. There's a picture of it from the beautiful place that they're destroying, right? The Pacific Atoll, and these very beautiful islands out in the middle of the Pacific, way even far away from Hawaii, more so off the coast of Australia, in the Marshall Island area and all that. They started doing all their nuke tests. They started bringing their nukes out there and blowing them up on these islands that belonged to somebody else, right? Far away from their land, where they wouldn't hurt their people, right? Let's go to the next slide. Here's another test they did, Ivy Mike, okay, in 1962. First thermonuclear test. Thermonuclear, which is the power of the sun, okay? Hundreds of times more powerful than the bombs they dropped in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Now look what they did to this island right here, where Ivy Mike was blown up. Notice what it says? It says the island, it says the Uligalub was an island, it says. Was an island. Yeah, it used to be an island before they blew up that bomb. Now there's no island. You see the picture? They blew it up. They destroyed the whole island. So it was an island. This is what those nukes were doing out there in the Pacific, in the Ring of Fire. Okay, let's go to the next slide. I wonder if anybody thought about any of this when they were doing it. It says 75 years after nuke testing in the Pacific began, the fallout continues to wreak havoc, it says. Between 46 and 58, the U.S. conducted 24 nuclear tests on Bikini Atoll and the Marshall Islands. These tests took place at 7 different sites, including on the reef, in the air, underwater, and over the sea. The combined yield of these test weapons was approximately 75 megatons of TNT in explosive power. The largest test, known as Castle Bravo, had a yield of 15 megatons and caused widespread radioactive contamination affecting nearby islands and even reaching as far as Australia, India, Japan, and parts of Europe. It didn't hurt anything, right? Notice where the Marshall Islands are, right out there in the middle of the Ring of Fire, right? Let's go to the next slide. And right off the coast there, the New Zealand, here's New Zealand. Remember the 2011 Christchurch earthquake on 2/22/2011? And it says, why does this keep happening to Christchurch? You know, they had one on 6/13/2011, right after that. And they kept having all these earthquakes. And like, why us? Why us? Well, I wonder. Isn't that where all these bombs were exploded? Right there? It says that the United Kingdom conducted 12 major nuclear weapons tests in Australia between 1952 and 1967. So it wasn't just the U.S. The United Kingdom was in on the action too, in that area. Okay? Let's go to the next slide. And then if blowing them up underground and blowing them up on the ground and blowing them up, you know, in the water wasn't enough, they had to blow them up in the atmosphere too. Right? Now I want you to get this, because I learned about this from the author of The Peaceful Solution. He talked about this starfish prime test in 1962, I believe is when it was. July 9th, 1962. It was the largest nuclear test conducted in outer space. And I told you to go and watch that Rainbow Bombs video, right? That's where it talks about this. But I want you to get this. These pictures right here are in Honolulu, in Hawaii. You see that light right there that's burning in the background? That's not the sun. That's a nuclear detonation in space. And guess how far away it is? 900 miles away. You know how long 900 miles is? If you've ever driven from Orange, Texas, which is on when you're coming in from Louisiana and East Texas, and you drive all the way to El Paso, you still haven't gone 900 miles. Okay? And you can see that flash right there from 900 miles away. Not only could they see the flash, they could see, I mean, it was affecting their electrical, it was affecting the radio signals and everything. Satellites started malfunctioning from nuclear explosions in space. It says the flash created by the explosion seen in heavy cloud cover from Honolulu, 900 miles away. Let's go to the next slide. And then, you know, if that wasn't bad enough, you know, but I got to end somewhere, right? Are you starting to see what they've been building up to here? Are you starting to see that whole area right there is getting ready for something really huge? And it wasn't something that it's not just something that's going to come because we didn't do anything to cause it. Because remember, for every cause, there's an effect, right? Isn't that what it says? I know this clock's wrong. What time do I have? This clock out here is like 5 minutes fast. Okay, I got 1 minute. Okay, great. So if that wasn't bad enough, you know, remember I told you about the New Madrid fault in the central United States? There's also called the Washoe Valley seismic zone there in Illinois, where we have the most nuclear reactors. 12 nuclear reactors in Illinois. They have the most. America has, what is it? How many nuclear reactors it says there? Is it 98? 96? But 12 of them are right there in a seismic zone. Now, who did all this planning? You know, who did all this planning, this thinking ahead on these on building or exploding bombs, building nuclear power plants, and, you know, in all these areas where there's all this earthquake activity and volcanic activity and subduction zones? Sounds pretty smart, doesn't it? Must have been those schools of higher learning that came up with all this, because I don't know how you could be blowing up all these bombs and doing all this nuclear activity in the middle of these earthquake zones, right? But anyway, I hope you learned a little bit more about why there's a big one coming. And let's see what triggers it. But just know where it came from, where it all started. It didn't come out of nowhere. It came from our human activity, and that activity was not positive. So the next class, it's going to be on what's that? 626? Okay, 626, 2024, right? Yeah, 6/26/24, 5:30 p.m. Central Standard Time. I hope if you're living on the West Coast, you're still with us. But if you remember what I said, you start preparing. I'll be moving inland. We'll hope to see you next time, okay? Thank you.